Hello, welcome to Club IDIC. Today, we will be watching By Inferno's Light from Star Trek Deep Space Nine and discussing fighting for freedom. Please enjoy this meeting. Hey there, how are ya?
Yeah. So.
So?
How about you?
I'm here.
Hey, well, that's the starting point, right?
Yeah. But today we get to have a little goodness, courtesy of some very cool Star Trek characters.
Yes.
Especially one of my favorite Star Trek couples, one of my favorite Deep Space Nine couples. Well, they weren't officially a couple, but they kind of were.
Oh. I'm tired. They just would not let me sleep today every single time. Somebody would come in here and wake me up.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I would like to say that means I'm going to sleep good tonight, but it probably doesn't. So, story of my life.
That sucks.
You know if Anthony's joining us?
I don't know who's joining us. It's still a bit early, so.
Well, I talked to him on Facebook Messenger for a minute, but he never answered that question, so I don't know.
I don't know. People are free to come and go as they please.
Well, I know. I just didn't know if maybe he said something.
Nope. You know, I'm a bit of an oddity in the way I captain the meetings. So maybe people are just tired. I don't know.
Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna try to see this message real quick. Sorry about that. This lady wants to buy my mom's canning supplies because she wants to get rid of them.
Oh.
So there's not very many people who do canning anymore.
Oh, my mom loves canning. She's obsessed with it.
We used to be. Man, my canning stuff won at the county fair and state fair. At the county fair every year, state fair a few years. But Mama really can't physically do it anymore. And Daddy's gone, so there's nobody putting in a garden. So
yeah.
You know. Life goes on.
Yeah. So what do you like about this episode?
Well, there's lots of intimate moments that are, when Garak's dad dies, um, for the first time, you get a glimpse of emotion, like true emotion from Garak, because his whole premise is tell a new lie every time, so because the truth
That's
is too
true.
boring or too whatever. So we see the first true moment of emotion out of Garak.
Well, and Garrick's always been about sentimentality is the greatest weakness of all, and he was never one to share about his personal life. But he allowed Julian to literally be in the room with him when he and Tain were having a final conversation and an honest conversation.
Well, I mean, when they were about to go back in there, when Martok came out and said, if you want to speak to him, now's the time, Garak looked at Julian, and it was almost like, come with me, please. I mean, that's the way I took it anyway. Like, I don't want to be alone in this moment.
Well, they sort
That's
of
how
had
I
an
felt.
unspoken, they
And
had a sort of
then,
unspoken love, I think. I think it was an unspoken love. They were very much attached, as much as the network didn't want that to be. I think the fans could see it. I think they had this
I know
unspoken.
Garrett. I mean, I know Andrew played the role in that way, but it was not mutual at all. I mean, I don't feel that at all as being a mutual thing, not the same level. And then when they got back to the station, there was a moment between Julian and Miles, and then there was the moment between Garak and Ziyal. And I mean, Garak, especially, the look on his face with Ziyal, he didn't know how to, like, he couldn't wrap his brain around that. And we know later in Sacrifice of Angels, when she died, and Garak said that he understood that she loved him, but he couldn't understand why. I think that kind of shows us again that feeling, because as a child, his own dad, his own father denied him. All through his career, he denied him as a son. Even then, in his last moments, he was trying to deny him as his son. And
Yeah.
he never truly acknowledged it, because after Garak was like, just this one time, tell the truth, he turned around and started his story about the one time when they went and did something together. But he did not ever give Garak the satisfaction of that answer.
You know what? I think that, and I've written an essay on this. I don't know if you got around to reading it, but I've written how I peg Garak as a divergent because he was unable. He wasn't unwilling. He was unable to do what he was expected to do by the standards and expectations of Cardassia, because he failed at being in the order. He ended up failing at being in the order. He ended up failing living up to the expectations of Cardassia because it ended up being exiled from Cardassia for whatever reason. We don't know the truth because he's so freaking good at lying. But he ended up failing to live up to the expectations of Cardassia. And then he later ended up working for the Federation in the war against Cardassia. So even more of a sense, he was a divergent during the war, and he continued his divergency from before.
And I think he really had to come to terms that what he was doing to help, he knew in his mind that it had to be done, or all of the Alpha Quadrant would be lost.
And he had
But
to really
he
work.
also knew the losses that Cardassia would take, and that fight within himself
Yes.
is so strong. But it was really during this episode that those claustrophobic things came back, because of that time he spent in there alone in that cramped space.
Well, again, that's another, I think that's another reason he was divergent, because I don't believe most Cardassians are claustrophobic. Most Cardassians don't have weaknesses that they can't overcome through rigorous dismissal of the weaknesses. Garak acknowledges his weaknesses. There was an episode with Ezri where he accepted the counseling and admitted that he was ashamed of being considered a traitor, that he was ashamed of doing work for the Federation. He eventually came to acknowledge and admit his divergencies, and he allowed others to help him come to terms with, hey, I'm divergent, and that's okay.
And I think his father caused a lot of that. We have been talking about mental health, and we've been talking about, how society reacts. But I don't think that we really hit on the subject of some of those are caused by things that happened, or the way we were treated as children. Garak admits to his father locking him in a small closet when he disobeyed or didn't live up to Tain's expectations.
Well, Tain was technically, he went by his uncle. Garak was raised by a man named Tolan. Tain was his uncle in name. Tain did not legally acknowledge Garak as his son.
Ever.
Because it would have looked bad, and Mila was a housekeeper. It was a social class thing. That's what I understand it to be anyway.
I've heard that, but if that's true, I don't think Garak had any idea, because of the end of season 7. I think if he had known that he would have contacted me a lot earlier than he did.
Oh,
Because
I think
Tain was gone. I mean, there was no protecting Tain's reputation anymore. Tain was gone. So I think that he may have reached out to her prior to that. I don't know.
I think Garak knew it all too well, because he was an expert at snooping and not minding his own business. I just think there was really nothing he could do about it, because he was in exile.
You may have a point there.
But earlier you said about how Garak and Julian's relationship wasn't mutual in both parties. I think it was. And if you want to see really good fan-made continuations, you should go to the Sid City YouTube and look up alone together and little achievements. They're really good fan compilations of the continued Julian Garak relationships. That's what I
I
encourage.
have listened to some of that.
They're very good.
To go in and start over and do all of
Yes.
it.
They're very, very well written compilations and well performed, actually performed by Sid and Andy themselves.
Yeah, I've watched some. I say watched. I mean, it's really more listening, but
Well, they're very good.
yeah, I really have intended to go back and want and do that. I need to do that.
Yes, and it's just interesting, like fighting for freedom from the failure to accept oneself and one's circumstance, and a failure to love oneself. I suppose Garak was also guilty of that, a failure to accept oneself, right?
Well, I mean, if his own parents didn't accept him,
Well,
it,
that's funny that that's something we should touch on, I suppose. Does a parent's failure to accept their child automatically mean that a child should hate themselves forever? I don't think so, because if I let my
I
father
don't
hate
think
my
so.
guts,
But I think it often does lead to an issue being able to accept themselves.
it's true, it does, but it doesn't guarantee that they necessarily will, because children have choices. If I let my father's hatred of me define who I was, I would never be anything better than I am now. Like, but I'm not allowing it. He's dead. He's not coming back. And I thank God he's dead. And I'm doing so much better because I have a good mother. I have a good stepfather. I have people in my life and other resources that tell me I'm worth something. And to hell with what he said, my dad, because I know that I'm worth something and I'm working on trying to build my worth no matter what he said when he was alive.
Well, but I think you're a lot stronger than a lot of people. I think that there are a lot who don't have anyone, and then or they're just not brave enough to get to that point of,
Oh,
you know what, I don't need this hate, I don't need this negativity, I don't need this person's ill in my life. So it takes a really strong person to be able to do that. And I think the easiest thing to do is usually not to stand up, not to fight for yourself, not to defend yourself. So,
oh, well, thank you for thinking me strong and brave, but I had to work at it. It wasn't just an automatic snap of the fingers. Thank you.
I do understand that. I mean, over the years, I mean, I've been dealing with kidney failure now for 15 years.
Oh my gosh, you are stronger. Oh goodness, I give the crown to you.
But people say that, and I don't feel that. I you know, because I know how many nights I cried myself to sleep, or I, felt like completely giving up and felt like nobody cared whether I lived or died. And I know all of that, you know, but sometimes we don't recognize strength as sometimes it's just surviving the day. It's
Mhm.
just really that simple. Um, I mean, some days you don't go out and slay a dragon. Some days it's I went to the bathroom and brushed my teeth.
Some days the dark
And
your mind and your own body just being overwhelmed.
and so we don't recognize that in ourselves, and far too often we don't recognize it in other people either, but we don't recognize that even people who do see that in others don't see that in themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, the truly brave people that I know that have been through things, more often than not, they don't see that. They don't see that as something that they pulled themselves through, um, regardless of how difficult it was. And I think that we need to be more accepting of ourselves, because, a lot of people, they'll say IDIC, or they'll say, that we're this accepting community, and some people are more accepting of other people, but they don't internalize that for themselves.
Yeah,
So
it's very true.
it's I mean, I get it. I get it. I've struggled with that for most of my life too. Um, but I do think that we need to be more accepting, because I think all the way around, if you look at all of our main characters on Deep Space Nine, Julian still struggled, and we see comments made in later episodes, even after um, Dr. Bashir, I presume, we see comments that were made that show us that Julian really struggled with the whole genetic modification stuff. Um, we see him struggle with relationships. I mean, before him and Miles got close, you see him asking, "Do I annoy you? Do I bother you?" Um,
And Miles didn't have the guts to actually, he didn't know how to say anything without sounding rude. So he didn't say anything at all. I actually wrote a piece on this.
but I think Julian, he matured so much, even just in the first few seasons. He matured so much from the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, go-getter child like thinking that he had. He was going out to the edge of the frontier. He was gonna be cowboy doctor. Um, but I think he was pretty oblivious in the beginning about annoying some of the other staff members. But I think he
Mhm.
started noticing, and you see him like kind of pull himself back and rein himself in, um multiple times as we grow. um I think there was a part of Cisco that was always questioning that things that happened in the past, losing Jennifer. um I don't he never really questioned his command decisions, but I think there was an aspect of, always holding himself to the highest possible standard. And I think that stemmed from, not being able to save Jennifer, and worrying about, is he raising Jake right? And I think more of his things that he questioned were on his personal side of his life, not professional. I mean, we didn't see him like Picard staring out the window at the stars passing by, questioning, did I make the right decision? Because I feel like he was ready to face the consequences. Maybe I didn't make the right decision, but I would make that decision again because I stand by it. I felt like it was the right thing to do. And I felt like he was a lot more confident there. But I do feel like there was some questioning on the parental side. You know, some things that he did and said. As a parent, you look at and you're like, yep, been there, done that, thought that, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if we really sat down and analyzed each member of the cast, I think we could identify some struggles like that.
Did you know
But
the problem with living up to the highest possible standard all the time? When you screw up, you beat yourself down into the dumps so much that you forget the good parts of yourself, and you're so obsessed with trying to correct your mistakes that you forget what's good about yourself, and you constantly focus on your mistakes and you forget what you've done right.
well, I think Cisco was headed down that path, and because he started really questioning every decision he was making, and then the casualty list came in. He looked at that list of
Uh-huh.
names and he doubled down on his decision and said, you know what? This can't continue. We cannot do this. And so I think part of that was this feeling of responsibility. I mean, he looked at those names and he reminded Dax, they're not just names. And that, I'm about to tear up now, that really hits me because they're not just names. And I remember during the Gulf War, and our local news station, anytime somebody from Oklahoma died in the war, they would put their names on at the noon newscast, and they had a list, like the casualty lists during the Dominion War, and they scrolled all of the names down, and I recognized names a couple of times that were kids. I mean, they were just kids. They were barely old enough to be sent over there. And that's when it hits you. That's when the reality just, they're not just names. You're
No.
talking about a whole life, a whole family surrounding this name. And I think today, and for years now, but especially today, we see a list of casualties and it's just a name. And there's danger in that. A lot of danger in that. But I
Mhm.
think we really should remember that each and every person has their whole story and a whole group. I mean, they had this game that we used to play back in high school about how many lives are touched by one person. And every year at graduation time, we would do how many people would directly be affected if one of you died in a car accident. And we made a list, parents, grandparents, and aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and it got to be a really long list. And then one year it became really, really personal and hard hitting when a kid from our youth group did die graduation night, coming home from a party. And that's when it went from a number, as shocking as it was, and a list of people, to reality, because we were those. And the effect that it has when one person dies, when they were being held prisoner and they were talking about, Martok was talking about all of the Klingons that died at the hands of the Changeling that replaced him. And Bashir said he could only imagine what his replacement was doing, and almost wiped out all of Bajor. And you just think about the number of lives that were touched by that one person being MIA.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Well, how is it that nobody noticed that Julian wasn't Julian and that Garak was just gone?
Well, they knew Garak was gone because Garak and Worf went to check out the signal that they got, the Cardassian signal that they intercepted.
But how did they not know that Julian wasn't Julian? Did they really care so little for him that they couldn't notice that his behaviors were different? They worked with him for how many years? They worked alongside him. They saw him socially, and they really didn't notice. How did they not understand how that must have made him feel? Like when Dr. Bashir, I presume, happened, this is how he described himself. The word you're looking for is unnatural, meaning not from nature. Freak or monster would also be acceptable, was maybe part of that resentment for the fact that they didn't notice. Was he still angry about that? And he was using such self-deprecating language that I'm wondering, oh, I'm so terrible. I'm so insignificant. I don't matter this much. That
I think he was more hurt, but yeah, definitely. I'm sure there were lots of emotions. And I'm sure that he felt a lot when he came back to the station too, because he was gone for a month.
Like if somebody I cared about or supposedly cared about was missing for a month and some duplicate showed up, I would probably notice. It's like nobody noticed it was a changeling and instead of the authentic Julian.
Yeah, I feel like that would hurt a lot. And I'm sure he was hurt because he even asked Miles, he's like, you didn't notice? And, I think that had to hurt. We didn't see that initial reaction with the other members of the senior staff, but yeah, I mean, the sheer number of hours that he spent with them every day, and they didn't figure it out. I mean, there was no.
Did they just figure Julian was minimizing his social quirks just to be more tolerable to be around? And they're like, oh, Julian's just, minimizing his, like, neurodivergency. Oh, he's tolerable now. Let's celebrate. Yay. He's more tolerable to be around.
I don't think they really thought too much about it. I mean, one, the war was on everybody's mind, so there was enough of a preoccupation with everything and the worry that, anytime we could be surrounded by a Dominion fleet much bigger than us. I think that was like ever present and weighing on people. And I think we saw in the sound of her voice, in Miles' speech, that he knew and he recognized the fact that he had withdrawn himself. And I think each and every one of them, to a point, had withdrawn themselves a little bit. So I think it wasn't as noticeable because everybody had kind of pulled back a little.
Did they not heed Odo's warnings though? Do you remember in The Way of the Warrior, they had those drills about the changelings, and Odo warned them, the founders are better shapeshifters than I am. They can morph into anything. Why weren't they aware of this sudden switching? Why weren't they testing blood?
I think there was a false sense of security, in the sense that what's not going to happen here. We've taken precautions, we've trained, but the founders didn't see it that way. And they were not afraid to infiltrate any area. And I think that there was a little bit of being a little too comfortable at the station.
Mm-hmm.
They were just a little too comfortable. And I think, at least Cisco was on the ball when he realized we got a transmission from Dr. Bashir on the other side of the wormhole. Then who the heck has been parading around here? Because we know he's been gone at least as longer than Garak, and they must have known he was coming back from that conference. I mean, Cisco was quick on the thinking there. Hey, we've got a problem. Where is he? He's not on the station. I mean, if he had just taken 30 seconds longer to figure that out, it'd have been too late.
Mm-hmm.
So at least he was quick on the draw there. But I do think there was some complacency for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because, that changeling was doing Dr. Bashir's job. And I had a discussion on a different Star Trek page. How did that changeling have the knowledge to do his job? I mean, think about it. He did surgeries. He was providing medical care for a month on a busy space station. He saw a lot of patients, and nobody suspected, which means the changeling did a good enough job to be a passable Dr. Bashir.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe they met.
Our discussion before was that the founders clearly absorbed the knowledge of the person that they assumed their position, which makes them an even more formidable foe when you think about it. But in order to pass off as somebody, they had to have enough of a knowledge of them to do so. So it's like they absorbed all of their knowledge. They had to be able to recognize people. That's kind of scary too, you know.
That is scary. Yeah.
Which means Odo probably somewhere within him had those abilities too. He just didn't know how to use them.
Or didn't want to. He was around for a long time.
Well, I think, you know, he was so good at his job, and maybe he was subconsciously using some of those abilities because, I mean, he was so good at his job and figuring out what was happening and getting the bad guy and all of that, you know.
Yeah.
So, just a thought.
Yeah, it's a very good thought. Speaking of absorbing information, did we want to do that?
You mean go ahead and start the episode?
Yeah, I don't think anybody else is coming.
It doesn't look like it. A little bit sad. I keep hoping that my cousin will join. There was a period of time when I was not able to invite people to the group. So I sent people to the group and my cousin joined, but I never see him in here. So
I don't know what to tell you.
I know. I need to ask him. I need to just flat out ask him.
All right, so are we ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome.
All
You
right.
know the drill. So
See you in a bit.
yeah, see you.
All right.
Hello.
Hello.
How did you like it?
Well, I did actually, not that I really didn't notice before, but kind of paid more attention to. Like Dax being shocked when Julian, well, the changeling pretending to be Julian, suggested blood screenings. Of course, we know that he suggested that to keep the staff distracted while he did what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know, Garak's little pep talk to himself.
That was interesting.
It was. He mentioned the walls collapsing at, I can't say the place that he was at, but then, you know, he did refer to his friends being right outside the wall, which, you know, the fact that he acknowledged them as his friends to me says
Yeah.
something.
Yes, but you know, Worf and Martok, they talked about how it takes true courage to face one's own worst fears, and that's what Garak was doing. He was inside the claustrophobia. He was facing his fears, and one of the worst things, one of the hardest things people can do is face their weaknesses, is face their frailties, is face their own divergence from the rest of typicalness. And that's what Garak did. He looked at himself, he looked at his weaknesses, and instead of focusing on what Tain had told him in their last conversation, he's like, okay, I'm in this situation. What can I do to help myself and my friends get out of it? I have to let these walls down and go deep within myself and forget that I have these fears and weaknesses and focus on helping myself and these people that I care about get out of this very ugly situation, or we're all basically going to die. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's so hard to actually look at oneself and see oneself as a being of worth, especially when you basically endured a lifetime of being told that you're not a being of worth, just like Tain did with Garak. Because I have a feeling that's what Garak endured in his life. That, oh, you're a being of no worth just because you're unable to do what you're expected to do. That's probably what got Garak exiled from
Well,
Cardassia. He failed to live up to the expectations placed on him by Cardassia.
and we've heard Garak in the past say to Tain, you know, with Tain, with, I don't remember which one was talking now, but it was mentioned that Garak was a weakness that Tain could not afford. And Garak said, yes, you have told me that my whole life, so.
And it's not a bad thing to be a divergent, but in the culture that he was in, it was a bad thing. And Garak hated himself a lot. He literally wasn't a typical Cardassian, and he knew that. And he spent a lot of time just loathing himself for that. But, eventually he had to come to the point where he had to accept himself and his circumstance. I don't know if he loved himself. I don't think he did. I don't think he did. And, it's sad because a lot of things about Garak were positively lovely. He did a lot of lovely things for a lot of people. But if you don't love yourself, you're really only living half a life. And the same with Julian. There was a point when he was exposed after so many years of hiding that he had to learn to accept himself. And I'm thinking about that conversation they had in the ship when Julian was mending Garak. I might as well accept myself for what I have. That's not loving oneself. Am I just off base?
No, not at all. I just think, I'm got several thoughts going in my head.
Confused you, oh dear.
No, it's just my brain moves faster than I can talk.
Yeah.
So, on the one point, Garrick had said that an orphan on Cardassia was the absolute lowest, just not even considered a citizen, not even considered
Right.
worth living. And I think he related to that feeling because I think he placed himself mentally there.
Well, he was an emotional orphan. He didn't feel like he had caregivers at that point. Maybe Mila, but to a point.
But I think that he really placed himself right there. So, there was definitely that. But I think they all were fighting their own demons, and a lot of those they were holding to themselves and not realizing that sometimes it's easier to fight those demons when your friends can help.
Mm-hmm.
And Worf went into that last fight fully understanding that the chances were he was gonna die during that fight.
Or always been a
Which,
fighter.
a lot of that was his own pride, but during that, he definitely earned Martok's respect. They did not exactly meet well for their initial meeting. Martok was very angry with Worf, and Worf felt like he was justified in being angry with Martok. And then for him to earn his respect that way enough to be invited to be his brother, you know, that's that was quite a change. But I think Martok realized he was seeing the real Worf for the first time, and he gained a lot of respect for him.
Yeah. Like
So
Worf, literally, quitting and giving up even when circumstances are very dire. Quitting is not honorable to Worf, and Worf was never a quitter. So that's probably why he continued fighting, even though his body was literally falling apart in front of him. And I do have a question for you that I want you to consider. Maybe this will help.
okay.
Do you suppose Julian and Garak gravitated towards each other so much because they were, in a sense, both emotional orphans because of their divergencies? They found in Eve was
Absolutely.
connecting to each other because they were both, like, they had families in a sense, but they were both emotional orphans because of their divergencies. They just had divergent natures and personalities.
Absolutely. I think there is something within us that is almost like a magnetism to like people. So I do think that there is that. I've noticed on more than one occasion, for example, someone that was autistic being able to recognize another person with autism without actually having met them first.
Mhm.
I've noticed that people who have
This is true.
the same like-minded things, the same struggles, if you will, connecting over that struggle even before they realize that that's a thing. So yeah, I definitely think that people with the same struggles just connect.
Yeah, this is very true. And it's nice that they had that kinship in each other when they found it so hard to connect with everybody else.
I think that people are placed in our path, and so I feel like those meetings are not just an accident or by chance. I feel like they're planned.
Mm.
And then there's that connection, and I think that's planned too. I think, you know, these people with are going to have this struggle. They've got this struggle. They're going to find each other, and they're going to get strength from each other. So I think that's definitely a very real thing.
And this, yeah, that's true. Because this situation actually, it brought Deep Space Nine and the Klingons, Starfleet and the Klingons back together. This was the episode where the Khitomer Accords
Right.
was reconstructed because they saw the value in working together and seeing the need to work together again. And Cisco pretty much brought it back together.
Cisco was so slick with that too.
He was
Like
like,
that was so well played.
what's good for this is good. This will help us. You should sign it.
I love it. He played that so well. But out of our main captains, Cisco understood the Klingons better than any of them. Even Picard, who had a Klingon on his bridge. Sisko still understood the Klingons better than Picard. I'm not sure quite how he came about that, because he really did have that understanding, and he worked with Worf a lot less time, but he definitely had a way with the Klingons.
Well, I think Cisco, no disrespect to any of the other captains, I think Cisco had been through things, been through great griefs and great trials, and he was able to take those experiences and use them for good in a way that the other captains were not. And he didn't let emotion
And
rule the decisions he made, and the other captains kind of used their emotions a lot in the decisions more than Cisco did.
that's true.
And that's why
But
he's my favorite captain.
then there is the aspect of the prophets. You know, they did help him,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that may have come from them. I mean, sometimes he just knew things. So I think there's definitely possibility that affected it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like, having a spiritual presence, a higher power never hurts anybody. Even, it helps to have that like extra center in one's life. It really does. It gives you extra focus and gives you clear mind. It teaches you a lot more than if you didn't really have a central spiritual presence in your life, or a higher power, or whatever you want to call it. It helps you to see things that you might not otherwise see if you didn't have it. I guess that's a good way to say it.
Well, I love the fact, and this was mentioned, I think it was yesterday, on one of the other Star Trek groups, that Deep Space Nine had a very unique ability to take spirituality that was, I mean, in TOS, it was absolutely, Gene Roddenberry was very against any kind of spirituality at all. That's mentioned in books about him. It's mentioned in articles. It's mentioned a lot. The Next Generation, we only see spirituality in reference to cultures that are pre-warp and considered, not
Mm-hmm.
worthy and not developed enough. So to see Bajor, which is, they're fighting to get into the Federation, they're fighting to get them to come in, and they are a very deeply spiritual people. Everything that they do revolves around the whole spiritual aspect, the prophets, the orbs, the prophecies, their whole structure, the Vedic, the Vedics, the Kai. That's it's such an integral part of life that Kara mentions on several occasions. She cannot separate any aspect of herself out. She cannot separate her religion from her life, because it is her life. It is who she is. And we see that in a way that we really don't see
Mm-hmm.
anywhere else. I mean, the closest we come is in Voyager with Chakotay.
Right.
And it's not mentioned very often, but when it is, you can see the deep roots in the native religions and cultures. But you just don't see it very often. On Bajor, you see it. It's an ever present thing.
And you also see the negative influence, the negative spirits trying to influence people for bad. And you also see the consequences of Cisco not following the prophets, because the death of Jadzia Dax is a consequence of Cisco ignoring the warnings of the prophets. Maybe I'm just a geek.
And he made that decision, and that is one decision that he did actually regret. And we know he did because he did say something
Yeah.
when he had his meltdown.
And he lost connection with the prophets for several months afterwards because of that. It just, everything went dark. His mind went dark, his connection went dark, and he had to go on a little journey to regain connection.
And that whole, I love those episodes, and I have rewatched those episodes more than any of the others. Well, except for Trials and Tribulations, because I probably watch that at least twice a month. But just watched that yesterday. But yeah, that drawing and the realization that comes to him, and that internal struggle when the Pa race are giving him a false vision, and at that moment he needed Dax and her wisdom, and he had it. Even though it wasn't Jadzia, he had it because he had Ezri there. So that was a moment, because he broke through that vision and he was able to open the orb and reconnect with the prophets, which was a turning point, and then him being able to talk to the prophets and keep the rest of the Dominion fleet from coming through. I mean, all of these things were dependent on him understanding and taking some time to reconnect, but to be alone and have that mental break that he desperately needed. And I think the prophets knew that. Maybe that's why they were quiet for a while, is they knew he needed that mental break, because
That's true.
he had a lot. I mean, all of them had a lot on their minds. All of them were worried about things, but he felt like he had the weight of the alpha quadrant on his shoulders, and his dad mentions that. You look like you have the weight of the alpha quadrant on your shoulders, and kind of looked at him, because he did. He really did.
Well, he also, like, his disobedience to the prophets got someone killed, and then, like, his disobedience got someone killed, and to have that on your shoulders, it's like, when you have that kind of a grief on your shoulders, you block out whatever else. And the prophets are like, oh, we can't get through to this person. Let's go quiet for a while. Let's let him work through his grief and his pain, and maybe in a while he'll be ready to be able to hear and feel and communicate with us again.
And it worked.
Because you have to, when you're communicating spiritually, you have to really clear your mind and open your heart. You can't be bogged down with other griefs and distractions. Otherwise, there's no room for any other communication, correct?
Sure.
And maybe I'm just way into it. I don't know.
No, it makes total sense to me.
Yeah,
Maybe somebody will watch this later and disagree, but
maybe. But yeah. But it's like, it's fighting for freedom from yourself, from your doubts, from things that happen, from things that affect your mental health, from the shame you have about being divergent. It's fighting for freedom from everything, not just the physical prison situation that the individuals were in the episode. It's fighting for freedom for a lot.
Well, it's funny that you use that word because I
Which
think
one?
we all prison because I think we all have a part of us that we lock away that if people knew this about me, they wouldn't like me, they wouldn't accept me, they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't treat me the same. And I think if any of that gets out, any of that escapes, then we've got ourselves in a situation where we put ourselves in prison, so to say, that we're going to block out, okay, well, this group of people knows something about me that I'm ashamed of. So therefore, I'm just not going to deal with this, or I'm not going to associate with this. And I think every one of us does that to an extent.
Or we just let, we let our experiences hold power over us. We let the past hold power over us. We let the shame of the past or the past experiences hold power over us. And we really shouldn't. We put ourselves in prison by our own shame and our own fears. And
Well,
yes, the past can hurt. The past can hurt and it can cripple us sometimes, but it's in the past. And we just need to learn from the past, whether or not we have responsibility with our past experiences or whether or not it just happened to us. The past is the past. We need to learn from it. We need to grow despite of it, just in spite of it. And we need to just move on and work on becoming the best people we can be because we're capable of.
I think a lot of times we dwell on a moment in time that nobody remembers except for ourselves.
That too.
So while we're busy dwelling on this moment, everybody else has moved on and we're stuck in that moment.
We need to learn to exist beyond the moment.
And sometimes that's hard to do.
It is hard to do. It was hard for Cisco.
It was.
But he realized that if he didn't learn to exist beyond the moment, he wouldn't be in a position where he could receive what he needed to build his future and to receive all the good that was yet to come and receive all the responsibilities he had.
Smells like hair washing. Did you wash your
So
hair?
hold on just a second, Heather. Sorry about that. the nurse was bringing dinner in.
Oh, that's okay. Like, we can wrap up if you like. So you can eat.
Oh, that's interesting.
Would that be, is that what you would like to do?
Sorry, I'm just looking at everything. Hospital food is so
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
Is
Can't
that,
wait till I can cook for myself again. But yeah, I need to send you a PM, which I will be doing shortly. So
okay, yeah, we can wrap up so you can go eat.
all right, well,
It was great talking to you.
yes. Hopefully next are we gonna try for Saturday next week?
Yes, I
or
just
this
had
week?
something going on with my family this last Saturday.
I mean, that's all cool. I was just wondering because it seems like nobody's being able to make it on Saturday. That's why.
It's all right. Just have a lovely day.
All right. Okay. I will talk to you later.
Yes.
I
Enjoy
can,
dinner.
I can
Bye-bye.
figure out where I am eventually.
Okay, take
All
care.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all for coming to today's meeting. Live long and prosper.